Hey, my fellow listeners. We know you guys love these creepy stories, yet most of you aren't subscribing. Please hit that sub button and join the family. Hit the bell icon so you never miss another video. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. From the very beginning, it was the kind of job you take when you have nowhere else to go. When the road you were on ends abruptly at the edge of a small Wyoming town that barely registers on a map. The Crossroads Saloon was the only building with lights on for miles after sundown. A lonely beacon against the vast, oppressive darkness of the plains. I walked in looking for work and the owner, a man named Frank who looked like he had been carved from old leather and regret, took one look at my worn-out boots and said I could start that night. The training consisted of him showing me how the till worked and then sliding a single crumpled piece of paper across the sticky bar top. It was stained with coffee rings and the ink was slightly smudged. "Read this," he said, his voice a low gravelly thing. "Memorize it. Live by it. Do not ask me questions about it. Consider it your Bible." My first thought was that it was a joke, some weird test to see if the new guy was gullible. The list was short, just 6 rules, but each one was more bizarre than the last. 1. The jukebox is always on. It never stops playing. And you never ever unplug it. Not for a storm. Not for a repair. Never. 2. If a patron orders a glass of water with exactly 3 ice cubes, you are to ignore them completely. Do not make eye contact. Do not acknowledge they spoke. Pretend they are not there until they go away or order something else. 3. The reflection in the mirror behind the bar is not always your own. If you see it move independently, look away immediately and count backwards from 10 in your head. 4. Every night at 3:03 a.m., you must pour 1 shot of the cheapest whiskey and leave it on the bar for the man in the gray coat. He will not thank you. He will not speak. He will just drink it and leave. Do not try to stop him or speak to him. 5. If you hear a woman crying from the storage room, do not go in. Turn up the jukebox until you can no longer hear her. 6. And this one was underlined with such force, the pen had nearly torn through the paper. You must be gone by 3:33 a.m. The bar locks itself, and no one should be inside after that time. I looked up from the paper and Frank was staring at me. His eyes were the color of a dead sky, and they held no trace of humor. I opened my mouth to ask what this was all about, to laugh it off, but the words died in my throat. The intensity in his gaze was a physical weight. "These are not suggestions," he said slowly, each word measured and heavy. "These rules are the only reason this place is still standing. And they are the only reason you will leave here in one piece every morning. Do you understand me?" I nodded, a slow, uncertain motion. "Good," he said. "Now get behind the bar. Your shift starts in 10 minutes. Those first few nights were a study in surreal tension. The bar itself was unremarkable. A long wooden counter scared by decades of use. A line of stools with cracked red vinyl seats. A few booths along the wall. And that damned jukebox, a hulking relic from the 50s that glowed with a sickly orange light. It played the same 24 country and Western songs on a loop. A mournful soundtrack for the lost and the lonely who drifted in and out. I followed the rules like a religion, my eyes constantly darting to the clock, to the jukebox, to the mirror. The first time someone tested me was an old rancher with hands like gnarled wood. He slammed his empty bottle down and barked, "Kid, get me a water. 3 ice cubes. Nothing else." My blood went cold. I looked right past him, focusing on a knot in the wood of the bar, as if it were the most fascinating thing I had ever seen. I picked up a clean glass and began to polish it with a rag. "Hey, you deaf?" the man said, his voice rising. "I need a water, 3 ice cubes. Come on now." I kept polishing the glass, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel his angry stare burning into me. After a long minute of tense silence, he muttered a curse and said, "Fine, just a beer then. Whatever you have on tap." I served him the beer without a word, my hands shaking only slightly. He drank it in silence and left, shooting me a dirty look on his way out. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. I had passed the first test. The mirror was the next challenge. It was a long, fly-specked sheet of glass that ran the length of the bar, reflecting the bottles and the dim room behind me. At first, it was just a mirror. But then I started to notice things, little things. The reflection of my arm would be a fraction of a second behind my actual movement, or my head would be tilted at a slightly different angle. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, my tired eyes, but one night I saw it clearly. I was slicing a lime, and in the mirror, my reflection was not holding a knife, it was just standing there, hands at its sides, staring at me with a placid, empty expression. A cold dread poured down my spine. I remembered the rule. I wrenched my eyes away and stared fixedly at the cutting board. 10, 9, 8. I counted slowly, forcing my breathing to steady. When I looked back, it was just me again, my own pale, worried face looking back. From that night on, I avoided looking directly into the mirror. I would use it to keep an eye on the room, but I never met my own gaze. The man in the gray coat came exactly at 3:03 a.m., like clockwork, the first time I saw him. The door opened without a sound, and he seemed to glide in. He was impossibly tall and thin, wrapped in a long gray coat that seemed to be made of shadows. His face was long and pale, devoid of any discernible expression. His eyes were dark pits. He took a seat at the very end of the bar, as far from the door as possible. I had the shot of whiskey already poured, following Frank's instructions to the letter. I set it down in front of him, my fingers brushing the cold wood of the bar. He did not look at me, did not acknowledge my presence. His hand, pale and long-fingered, emerged from his coat sleeve and picked up the glass. He threw the whiskey back in one smooth, practiced motion, placed the empty glass back on the bar, and stood. He turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind him. The entire encounter lasted less than 15 seconds, but it left a vacuum of silence in its wake. The air felt thin and used. I realized I had been holding my breath. The crime started on a slow Tuesday. The bar was empty. The jukebox was playing some sad ballad about lost love. And then I heard it, a soft, muffled weeping coming from the storage room in the back. It was a genuinely distressing sound, full of a despair that was almost tangible. Every fiber of my being screamed to go and see what was wrong, to offer help, to do something. The sound was so human, so utterly broken. I took a step toward the end of the bar, my body moving on its own accord. The crying hitched, as if the person had heard me, and then it continued, a little louder, a little more pleading. And then I remembered Rule 5. I stopped dead, my fists clenching at my sides. The sound pulled at me, a siren song of misery. I forced my feet to move, not toward the storage room, but toward the jukebox. My hand trembled as I flipped the plastic pages, searching for the loudest song I could find. My finger landed on a track, some raucous Jerry Lee Lewis number. I pushed the button. The sad ballad wheezed to a halt, and the bar was suddenly filled with the pounding piano and frantic energy of great balls of fire. I stood there, watching the storage room door. The music was almost painfully loud, but beneath it, for a few seconds, I could still hear the crying, a thin, desperate wail that was then abruptly cut off. The silence that followed felt even heavier than the sound had. I felt like a monster, but I also felt a profound, bone-deep relief. I had survived another night. The rule about leaving by 3:33 was the one that governed my entire existence. I became a master of efficiency, cleaning and closing with a frantic speed as the hour approached. I would start my final sweep at 3:15, have the trash out by 3:25, and be counting the till by 3:28. I always made sure I was stepping out the door, key in hand, by 3:31, giving myself a 2-minute buffer. The one time I was late was the most terrifying experience of my life. It was a Wednesday. It had been a dead night, and I had gotten lazy, lost in my own thoughts. I was mopping the floor, and I glanced at the clock. 3:30, panic, pure and undiluted, shot through me. I threw the mop into the closet, not even bothering to wring it out. I grabbed my jacket and my keys and ran for the door. My heart was a wild drum in my chest. The clock above the door now read 3:32. I fumbled with the key, my hands slick with sweat. I finally got it into the lock, turned it, and yanked the door shut. I sprinted to my beat-up truck, parked a dozen yards away. As I slammed the door, I looked back at the bar. The lights inside flickered, not like a power surge, but like something was passing in front of them. Once, twice, and then they went out. But it was not a normal darkness. It was a thick, liquid blackness that seemed to swell against the windows. And then I saw it. A shape moved past one of the windows. It was tall and spindly, with limbs that seemed too long and too thin. It moved with a jerky, insectile gait. It was not the man in the gray coat. This was something else. Something that belonged to the bar after hours. I started the truck and peeled out of the gravel lot. Not looking back, I did not sleep at all that day. I just sat in my rented room, staring at the wall. After that, my adherence to the rules became absolute. It was not just about keeping a job. It was about survival. The bar and its strange rhythms became my life. The jukebox's endless loop was the soundtrack to my dreams. The man in the gray coat, a recurring character in my nightmares. I learned to function in that space of controlled dread. I thought I had achieved a sort of equilibrium, a tense truce with the unnatural laws of the Crossroads saloon. And then Leo was hired. Leo was young, maybe 22, with a smart mouth and a know-it-all attitude that grated on me immediately. Frank hired him because we needed another body, and Leo was the only one who applied. On his first night, I took him aside and showed him the list of rules. I tried to impress upon him the seriousness of the situation. I told him about the mirror, about the crying. I even hinted at what happened if you were late. Leo just smirked, a condescending twist of his lips. "You actually believe this crap," he said, flicking the paper with his finger. "This is just some psychological warfare from the old man. See how much nonsense the new guys will put up with. It is a power trip, nothing more." I tried to argue, to tell him about the thing I saw in the window, but he just waved me off. "Come on, man," he said. "You have been here too long. You are starting to see things. There is no such thing as monsters, just weirdos and drunks." And we served the drunks. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. Leo was not going to last. The inevitable happened on a night I was off. Frank called me the next morning. His voice was hollow, stripped of all emotion. "You need to come down here," he said. "It is about Leo." I drove to the bar. The morning sun felt obscene, too bright and cheerful for what I knew I would find. The front door was unlocked, standing slightly ajar. The slow, grinding horror of the new normal that Leo's disappearance created. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The place was a mess, but not a mess from a fight. Not really. It was the kind of disarray that suggested a sudden violent suction, like something had been pulled through the room with immense force, dragging the furniture out of place in its wake. Chairs were overturned, not as if they'd been thrown, but as if they'd been brushed aside by something large and careless. A table was lying on its side, one leg snapped clean off. But that was not the first thing I noticed. The first thing was the silence. It was a physical presence, a thick, woolly absence of sound that pressed in on my eardrums. The Crossroads saloon had never been silent. Not once. The jukebox was its heartbeat, a constant, loathsome of life that you felt in your teeth. Now it was dead, a cold, dark hulk in the corner, its usual hum and glow completely absent. The vibrant colors of its selection buttons were just dull gray plastic. Its power cord was ripped from the wall socket, not unplugged, but ripped, with little flecks of torn drywall still clinging to the plug, and it lay coiled on the floor like a dead snake. Frank was standing behind the bar, just staring at the silent machine. He looked a decade older, the lines on his face etched deeper, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an impossible weight. He did not look at me when I walked in. He just pointed a trembling finger toward the storage room. His hand shook with a fine, constant tremor I had never seen in him before. I walked around the bar, my feet feeling like lead, each step an effort. The familiar scent of stale beer and disinfectant was now undercut by something else, a coppery, metallic tang that stuck in the back of my throat. And there, on the dark stained floorboards, was a dark, sticky smear. It was not a pool of blood, nothing so clean. It was a trail, a smudge that started near the jukebox plug, as if something had been dragged from that very spot. It was a rusty, brownish-black color, and it trailed off toward the storage room, a grotesque path that told a story without words. The door to the storage room was closed, but from the crack at the bottom, I could see that the light inside was off, which was wrong. The light in there was always on. A single bare bulb with a pull string that Frank said was never, ever to be turned off. I reached for the knob, my hand hovering an inch from the cold brass, but I could not make myself touch it. A cold dread, colder than I had ever felt, told me that whatever was behind that door was not Leo, and I did not want to see it. We never found Leo. The police came and asked their questions. 2 officers with bored, pragmatic faces. We told them he had not shown up for his shift, that we had found the place like this. We did not mention the rules. We did not mention the man in the gray coat or the crying. We were just 2 concerned employers. They took notes. They looked around. One of them nudged the overturned chair with his boot. But what could they do? There was no body, no evidence of a crime. Just a messy bar and a missing kid. They asked if he had any enemies, if he used drugs, if he seemed troubled. We shook our heads. They wrote it off as a walkaway, a young guy who got tired of his job and decided to skip town. Maybe some trouble with a girlfriend. They said it happened all the time. Frank and I stood side by side and nodded, playing our parts. But we knew the truth, a truth that sat in the pit of my stomach like a lump of frozen lead. We never discussed it, not once, but it hung between us every time we passed each other. The shift log. It was in the way his eyes would dart toward the jukebox every time he walked in, the way he would flinch if the storage room door creaked, a shared, unspoken knowledge that our world was far more fragile and infinitely more dangerous than anyone else could possibly imagine. I went back to work the next night. The air in the bar felt different, charged with a new kind of tension. It felt watchful, resentful. The first thing I did was plug the jukebox back in. My hand was steady, but my heart was hammering. As the prongs made contact, the machine groaned to life. A deep, reluctant sound from within its mechanisms. The lights flickered uncertainly for a moment, stuttering like a failing heart before steadying into their usual glow. The music that came out was the same old Tammy Wynette song, but it sounded different now, thinner, reedy, as if it were being played from the bottom of a deep well. The vocals sometimes seemed to warp, stretching into a faint, dissonant whine on the high notes. It was no longer just background noise. It was a wounded animal, and we were all trapped in its cage with it. Things have changed since Leo. The man in the gray coat still comes, his entrance as silent and precise as ever, but now, sometimes, when I set the whiskey down, he pauses before drinking it, his long, pale fingers resting on the glass without lifting it. He turns his head just a fraction, not enough to look at me, but enough so I can see the stark, sharp line of his profile. And in that moment, I feel the full weight of his attention. It is a cold, probing pressure that makes the hairs on my arms stand up, a sensation of being assessed, of being known in some fundamental way I cannot comprehend. He never looks directly at me, but I know he is aware of me in a way he never was before. It feels less like a ritual now, and more like a transaction, and I am not sure what I am paying for. The reflections in the mirror are almost never right anymore. Before, it was an occasional, unsettling glitch. Now it is the default state. Sometimes I see multiple figures moving behind me in the glass, when the bar is empty, shadowy forms that shift and sway just at the edge of my vision. When I spin around, the room is empty. Sometimes my reflection is smiling when I am not. A wide, toothy grin that does not reach its empty eyes. Other times it mouths words at me, silent syllables that I am terrified I might one day learn to understand. I have given up on the mirror entirely. I just keep my head down and work, polishing glasses until they squeak, arranging bottles with a compulsive neatness. Anything to avoid catching a glimpse of that other place, that other bar that exists just on the other side of the glass. The crying from the storage room is more frequent, and it has changed. The raw, human sorrow is gone, replaced by something else. It is less about sorrow now and more about anger. A low, guttural sound of frustration that seems to vibrate through the floorboards. It sometimes turns into a sharp, scraping noise, like nails on wood, or the sound of something heavy being dragged across the concrete floor. A sound that always makes me think of that dark smear. I turn the jukebox up louder than ever. The music now is just a shield, a wall of sound I hide behind. The frantic piano and wailing guitars are my only defense against the noises that threaten to worm their way into my brain. I can see the patrons notice it. They flinch when the volume suddenly spikes for no reason. They glance nervously toward the back room. But they are drunks and loners, and they probably just blame it on the eccentricities of a dive bar. They do not know they are drinking in a haunted house, that the man at the end of the bar is not a man, and that the bartender is slowly losing his mind. I am still here, still following the rules, but the cost is becoming clear. This job is a slow erosion of the soul. Every night is a lesson in controlled terror, a performance where a single misstep could mean a fate worse than death. I am a prisoner of this place, of these 6 strange rules that stand between me and whatever lives here in the dark. The rules are not for my protection, I have come to realize. They are for its containment, and I am just the temporary warden, a replaceable part in a machine I do not understand. I know that my time is limited, that one night my focus will slip, my watch will fail, a rule will be bent, not even broken, just bent. Maybe I will be a second too slow pouring the whiskey, or I will glance at the mirror for a moment too long, captivated by my own grinning reflection. And that will be enough. The bar is patient. It has been here a long time. And it is always, always hungry. It has tasted carelessness in the form of Leo. And it now knows that the rules can be broken, that the barrier can be breached, and I know, with a certainty that is my only companion in the long silent hours, that when my time comes, there will be no one to pour a whiskey for me, no one to turn up the music, there will be no Frank to call the police, no missing person report. I will just be gone. My existence wiped away as completely as Leo's, and I will become another part of the silence, another unseen shape moving in the mirror, another cautionary tale, another rule whispered to the next poor fool who walks through that door looking for a job. A new, unwritten rule, Rule 7, do not be like the last guy.